Good morning. I'm Daniel. I will do this presentation, Camunda Projects 101, and this is really about adoption journey with Camunda. And before maybe we start, maybe show of hands, who has already used Camunda in their projects? All right, and then I guess the other ones are sort of new to it and want to find out today what it's about and how to use it. This presentation here assumes some basic knowledge with Camunda and some basic that you're basically familiar with it. At the same time, I think it's also interesting if you haven't used it yet. The goal of this is that we basically take you through how to do projects with Camunda, what kinds of projects companies are doing with it, certain best practices that have proven to be very useful in the past, so that you can save some time and make your projects more successful, and certain pitfalls to avoid. And then lastly also to, of course, explain to you what the Enterprise Edition is as opposed to the Community Edition, so that you have an understanding of that as well. So let's get started. This is a lot of information now that I will be presenting that we have learned over time, particularly when working with customers. So on this slide here, you can see some of the logos of our customers. So this is companies using Camunda as a customer. So they are using the Enterprise Edition. And what you see here is that Camunda is basically used both by what I would call more corporate companies, so bigger companies that are basically going usually through digital transformation projects, so they're trying to become more customer-oriented or more customer-focused, more agile, and then you have some pretty broad lay of the land here in terms of telcos, but also maybe insurance companies and others. At the same time, what's quite interesting is that Camunda is also used by quite a few startups. So that's what you see here on the right. And these are usually companies that come up with new business models, new approaches to how to do certain things. And they're less in the business of, let's say, digital transformation because they're usually younger companies, but they're more driving digital disruption in terms of coming up with interesting business models that disrupt the companies over here. What's interesting in terms of our product is that it's used actually by those two kinds of companies. Nal is trying to signal something to me. The mic is?
Yeah, I just need to go closer to it.
I need to speak into the microphone. I'm sorry. It's better now, right? Right. So anyway, so Camunda is used by all these companies. And now just to look into a few concrete use cases. So this is something that was presented at CamundaCon 2 years ago. CamundaCon is our annual user conference that we do in Berlin every year, in September always. And this is by a company called Duni. And they are a very big manufacturer of paper tissues. And they have thousands of employees, and this is actually a process that is about making sure that internally everybody follows a business process. So you can see that here, are we all following the happy path? So you can see a business process here, and this is basically orchestrating employees inside Duni to do a certain thing. And this is one of the kinds of projects where Camunda is used when it comes to human workflow automation and making sure that as we go through a set of steps, our people in the company do them in a certain order. This is a different example. This is a German insurance company called Talanx. This is the biggest German insurance conglomerate in a way after Allianz. Most people here in the US are probably more familiar with Allianz, but Talanx is pretty large too. And this is all about end-to-end process automation. So this is in a way now the exact opposite of the use case I showed on the previous slide where it was all about human workflow management. This is actually about straight-through processing. So end-to-end process automation straight through. And their goal here is that already in the 3rd month after go live, the automatic processing rate of most selling distributor was 97%. So executing this process here on the bottom, we can see the straight through, the happy path. That's what's red. This is the heat map from Camunda, obviously, that you may be familiar with. We can see that most all requests go through that happy path, and there's only very few situations here where we need to then involve a human, which is down here. So their goal is to do straight through processing. Then this is a third example. Actually, 3 years ago here at a Camunda event here in San Francisco, 24-hour Fitness, which most of you are probably familiar with, presented this. And they are really using Camunda for some very high throughput processing. In this case, they're not automating business processes end-to-end, but they're automating certain individual parts of it, and they basically run their whole company on it. So we can see here they have 327 processes that are deployed. They're executing millions of steps in their workflows every day. So this is not even a full day, and they're already at 82 million steps that they have executed in workflows. So obviously here, humans play a very small role, but it's all about high throughput processing of pretty fragmented processes, as we can see down here. Now, an interesting thing with Camunda is that you can basically do these 3 types of use cases. So it's very well suited for human workflow use cases. This would typically be your high-touch B2B processes, maybe a know your customer process by a bank, approval processes where the human involvement is high. The rate of transactions we're doing is pretty low. Maybe we are in the thousands of transactions. But the general benefit that Camunda provides here is always this. We have visibility into what is going on and what all these humans are doing that are being orchestrated with the system. It's pretty good at straight-through processing, what I showed with the Talangs insurance case, where now, of course, we get to many more transactions. This is typically where you also enter a B2C space where maybe an insurance company is provisioning DSL lines or things like that. AT&T is a huge user of Camunda here in the US, and they're running many, many processes on Camunda. So all of that would be here in the middle. And then this is the 24-hour fitness use case that I showcased, where basically you are using the workflow engine to process very high rates of events, where you would get into the billions of transactions in a year, and where the biggest value then provided by the platform is usually resilience, because you want to be able to do that at scale and don't have it fail. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of what kinds of things you can do with Camunda. Now, when we look at how these projects typically play out, then we just saw, automate manual paper-based work is often an incentive to go and use Camunda. But also we see things like we want to move away from legacy BPMS systems that we are maybe using still. So that could be, the traditional, more monolithic, heavyweight BPMS that is still used by many companies. We've seen a lot of our customers go in and replace their legacy BPMS with Camunda because it's more developer-friendly and easier to maneuver with it. We see a lot of companies then also embed the workflow engine inside their product. So if you have more of a SaaS product where you want to have a layer of configurability in the system, then that can be a great thing to do. And also there's, of course, a lot of companies that have homegrown workflow engines or homegrown workflow engine-like things that they would then like to replace with something that is just, supported and works out of the box. So that's what we see a lot. Now, when it comes to then why are we doing that, it's a lot about increasing customer satisfaction, for example, with faster processing. So that's the insurance use case that I had, where it's all about damage processing, for example. We want to be faster in that. We want to be more consistent with it. So then workflow engine, in particular, of course, Camunda in this case, can be very helpful. It's often about providing process transparency internally so that everybody can see the processes and what's going on in there. It's about increasing the flexibility and reducing time to market because we don't need to build that piece, right? Because we have it out of the box. And some other things that then really help companies to move faster and be more agile. So that's what we typically see in terms of types of projects and then drivers behind these projects. Now, how do these projects often play out? In many cases, what we observe, particularly if it's a larger enterprise going through it, we see some business unit, this could be a claims department in an insurance company, for example, that wants to have a more efficient process or innovate on their product that they're offering to their customers. And then they go in, talk to IT, and then say, hey, can you please implement this better process for us, right? And then we have a bunch of different people involved here on the right, on the left-hand side in the business unit. So this could be a manager, an employee, somebody having to approve damage claims or things like that, maybe a project lead, and they then need to interact with these people here on the right. So typical setup for these kinds of projects. And then the challenges here are always, how can we collaborate and work together so that at the end we build a high quality and scalable and maintainable product and make these people here happy so that they can make their customers happy. And when you then go in and use Camunda for something like that, these projects then often take around 3 to 9 months in our experience. Typically, you would have an in-house IT that's going through that, or a bunch of our customers are also working with contractors or solution providers. And then all these people, as we said, need to collaborate really, really well. And now, just here, a couple of things that we found from our experience that really help making such projects more successful. So, first of all, if in that context you already have an agile development approach, it can be lean, it could be incremental, it could be something like Scrum if you do it more traditionally, that really helps. Because as always, it's a software project, so we need to collaborate really well across here, and doing that incrementally and agile is usually pretty good. So that has, in our experience, proven to be a critical success factor. The other thing is just in general that the business and IT are able to collaborate closely. The agile development process is one implementation of that, but as you then use BPMN and DMN, it really helps both sides to collaborate, given that they have some level of familiarity with them. So a critical success factor is often BPMN and DMN really help you to communicate between business and IT, but we need to understand it, of course. So, for example, what we do at Camunda is provide training around that. Just how can you apply BPMN and DMN successfully and effectively. Then, of course, it helps if you have a good software architecture. So make sure your systems are scalable. The people have the right skills to work with the tool stack that you have. And of course, it really helps if you have a strong stakeholder buy-in so that the project really gets the staffing and attention and budget that it needs. So these are things that we can't really provide, but where, as you go in and do your Camunda projects, it really makes sense to get them right before you start. Then, how do these projects typically go? Now, these are certain phases that we typically observe. So in the beginning, of course, there's some preparation phase where we define the project vision, evaluate the platform options, set up some project infrastructure. So budget gets maybe clarified. Maybe you decide to go with the enterprise edition of Camunda, things like that. Then there's typically a design and implementation phase where IT and business go through these loops of, incrementally getting to the process that we need to implement. So while it looks like, one phase after the other here, one thing I like to point out with this slide is obviously we want to be agile, so there's going to be a lot of loops in here, and of course also in here, that take us to incrementally developing these processes. But at some point, for the first time, we will then put it into production and then run it and observe it. And when it is in production for the first time, we'll see maybe what works well and what maybe doesn't work so well. And then we go through these cycles again. So that's typically how we see these projects play out. And this takes us back to, if you have more of an BPM background, then maybe you're thinking about this, BPM lifecycle. That's all about analyzing what we need, designing it, implementing it, and operating it. And what I can show you in a minute is how the tools in our stack basically support you in these different phases of the BPM lifecycle. Right. But if we now map that here, then we can see that design and implement, even if we have it in this cycle here, this shouldn't necessarily happen sequentially in a waterfall way, but of course you do that incrementally, as I explained, and the same for the other phases. I think I don't need to go in many details here, but it's all about going through these phases, but at the same time iterating very closely between business and IT as you go through it. Right. Now, Camunda, as you know, has both a community edition, which is open source and that you can use for free, and that takes you quite far through this, and it has an enterprise edition that adds certain features. For us, having that setup is quite important because with community, we can really build a technology that is broadly adopted by developers, that is easy to use, where we get a lot of feedback from people that use it, where we can really enable developers to be successful with that. At the same time, of course, with the Enterprise Edition, we are defining then a broader offering that then adds value to organizations that would go in and use it at a broader scale inside their organization. And then in here, we then have certain capabilities that are more enabling organizations to then apply BPM successfully. Now, this is the community stack, or the foundational stack, as we would call it. And if you have used Camunda already, then you're quite familiar with it. If you haven't, then just a quick overview. So as you know, we have a modeler here, which you can use to define BPMN processes. Once you have done that, you can then deploy them into the workflow engine, which you can either run as a REST API and then program against that REST API, or you can embed it into your Java application as a library that then runs inside the Java application. The same holds true for the decision engine, which is executing DMN. Once you have done that, you can then see the processes in Cockpit. Cockpit is an operations tool that allows us to look at the processes, look at certain problems that maybe exist in the processes. So maybe a process can advance up to a certain point and then it gets stuck. In Cockpit, I would be able to see that and fix that problem and then move on. So it's a tool for technical operations. Task list is then for human workflow. So it gives me the opportunity to, as a case worker or task worker, go in, look at which tasks are assigned to me, I can pick one, I can work on it, and then I can complete it. So that's sort of the foundational stack that is also open source and part of Camunda community. Cockpit there has what we here describe as rudimentary features. The Enterprise Edition that I can show here is then the full stack, which then adds more capabilities into Cockpit that are valuable if you go into bigger projects. For example, you can then do things like, as I'm going from one version of a particular process to a next version, I can sort of, connect how I can migrate then all my process instances from one version to the next. So the Enterprise Edition Cockpit allows me to do advanced use cases like that. But then we're also adding other tools. So we're adding Cowimo, which is a collaborative browser-based modeling tool that we can use as a team. And then inside there, we can all share through a repository the processes that we're working on. So I can make sure that everybody always has access to the latest version of the process. I can also make sure that if we go and update processes, I can see a diff, so I can see basically, hey, this is version 1 and this is version 2 and one step was added over here. So I can basically compare different versions of processes. And then it acts as a shared repository across that. So this is added with the Enterprise Edition. There is a free version of Cowimo available as a SaaS platform that you can just sign up for and use. So that's also available, but if you want to run it on premise or if you want to use the enterprise features in that SaaS platform, then it's only part of the Enterprise Edition. And then there's Optimize here. Who in the room is already familiar with Optimize? I am. Well, a couple of people. So Optimize is an analytics tool, right? So it's a process analytics tool that you can connect to the workflow engine. And then as we execute all these processes, it'll show us charts and heat maps and other reports that allow us to detect inefficiencies in our processes. So remember in the beginning, I had these images here. So down there you can see a BPMN process, and then there's this heat map which shows us which steps get executed all the time and which steps maybe get executed less. Well, that's the heat map that shows us this, and this is a feature that's available in Optimize, and it's quite powerful in there, so that I can get an immediate sense of where my happy path is, and so on and so forth. All right, getting back to this. Yeah, then Optimize basically uses a database to materialize all the data that's available from the workflow engine, and then we can build these reports and dashboards that allow us to, more from a business side, understand how efficient our processes are. So this was always our vision with Camunda, even when we started, to make sure that we can really build a tool that is quite powerful and deep when it comes to, let's say, the developer-facing process implementation and automation here in the middle, but where we can also involve all the stakeholders that are involved in these process implementation and automation projects, which we could then achieve with Optimize and Cowimo. So involve everybody in modeling and then show analytics to everybody in the company who wants to look at them, including the business side, of course. So now this tool stack itself is one part of the Enterprise Edition. The other part is then we give you access to professional services. So that's support, consulting, and training. Also, of course, we have customer success management. So as you go and subscribe to the Enterprise Edition, the first thing that usually happens is consulting. So this could be an architecture review where in the beginning maybe you have started to use Camunda, you're sort of sure that you're going in the right direction, but you want somebody to come in and look at it together with you and then point out, hey, maybe here and there we could do things in a different way, and that will save us time down the road. So that's where at the beginning maybe consulting can be helpful. Then as we go in, and need to enable more and more people in the team. This can be developers on the one hand side, but it can also be maybe business analysts or other roles on the business side. If we want to enable them to use BPMN and DMN effectively, training can be quite helpful to, again, save time down the road. Support is then, well, it's interesting while you are still developing to, again, validate maybe certain assumptions you're making about the product, or requesting features. It's also quite valuable once you are in production and then maybe experience certain challenges that you need help with overcoming. Their support can be quite helpful. When I now mention features, what do I mean with that? So often as you go through a project, even though Camunda is already quite powerful and has a lot of features, maybe you get to a point where you really need a new functionality to make your project successful. And then, of course, in the Community Edition, you can interact with us on an open source level, and we will work with you there, and there's quite of a good process behind it. But if you have access to the Enterprise Edition, of course, then your feature request just gets more visibility. We'll interact with you even more directly, which has proven to be quite helpful in the past. So now this is an attempt to map this a little bit in terms of we now have the tool stack here, Cowimo, Optimize, Cockpit EE, CSM Consulting, and then SLA-oriented support. Up here we have the different phases we looked at with the BPM Lifecycle. And what I try to visualize here is basically when I look at the Enterprise Edition and the value it provides, in which phases does it provide that value and by which tools or offerings here. So for example, we talked about Cowimo. Cowimo is just something you want to have from the start because it really helps us to initially collaborate very closely when it comes to modeling the processes, keep everybody on the same page. But then as we progress, it really makes sure that I don't know, the business side always sees when the developers have made small changes to the process. They would be able to see that in Cowemo. So it's really helpful across all of these phases. To highlight something else, when we look at support, as we said, it's really helpful, maybe not yet in a design phase. There you would more lean towards training and consulting, but as I said, then more as we go into production and then maybe have bug reports or feature requests that we need to leverage. The CSM team that we have internally is really taking you by the hand and guiding you through these different phases. If you want to hear a little bit more what they are doing, there's the gentleman in the back there, Max. He's actually leading that team. So after when we have a break, you can go and talk to him. Moving on here. So when you now ask yourself, hey, should I choose the community edition or should I choose the enterprise edition? Well, let me be honest here. You don't always need the enterprise edition. There is situations where you don't need it. So for example, maybe you are starting very small with a simple solution that doesn't have a high degree of complexity. Or it's maybe not super critical yet to the business, maybe we have a little bit of time and we don't need to be be done by December or something like that. Then it's, we've seen companies adopt the community edition quite effectively. We also have seen companies adopt the community edition effectively when they had maybe a large team inside their company that built a lot of tools around the community edition on top of it, and then really, in a way, served as an internal training and consulting and enablement team inside that company. If you don't have that, I would always recommend the Enterprise Edition, because that then really gives you that, but from us. This is then looking beyond that first project. So as you have made the first project successful, we usually call that the pilot project. It then makes it makes sense to then look at the second project, the third project, the fourth project, so that really, step by step you can adopt Camunda more broad scale inside your organization until you then really experience that digital transformation effect where suddenly many processes become transparent. We get data driven because we can see and optimize the heat maps and the reports and the stats. We're able to iterate quickly on our business and this way make our customers much more happier. So that's sort of what we see with certain companies. So for example, I think it was last year, Goldman Sachs gave a presentation at Camunda Day New York where they explained how they have literally hundreds of teams internal in their company working with Camunda, and their whole company basically runs on top of it. So that's then, of course, that really broad scale transformation that we're all aiming for. Yes, and if you do that, then you can, of course, celebrate success. So I mentioned that Camunda Con user conference that we have each year in Berlin. So for example, this is the gentleman from Goldman Sachs that also presented there. So they have 40,000 internal users that are using Camunda-powered processes. They have 14,000 different workflows deployed in their system. Every day they have 2 million new activities that get created by the processes. So this is huge, broad-scale adoption. But for example, this is German Telecom. In the US, you probably know T-Mobile, so that's a subdivision of that. They also are using Camunda now across, I think, like 7 or 8 projects internally, and they gave a very nice presentation at Camunda Con, explaining how they do that. So as you go through that journey, it would be really great to also see you at Camunda Con maybe next year or the year after that, presenting your project. All right, and with that, I'm done. I think there's very interesting presentations coming up, including a demo by Patricio. We have some customer presentations, so I'll be here. Don't hesitate to approach me. I can answer almost all technical questions as well, or sometimes I can. So thank you for listening and enjoy your day here at Camunda Day. Thank you.